Hello. You are listening to The X-Files by Trevor Shelby. Copyright Trevor Shelby. Make sure to subscribe, and when we get new episodes, you'll be the first to know.
Chapter 1. Dinner at the Hart house. The third outfit was the charm, or so I desperately hoped as I smoothed the navy blue dress over my hips for the 14th time. I'd bought it specifically for tonight's dinner, after Brad had mentioned, casually, always so casually, that Karen preferred classic silhouettes on women of a certain age. I was 34, not 84, but in the Hart family ecosystem, being past 30 meant sartorial choices became a minefield of potential criticisms. Our master bathroom gleamed under recessed lighting that flattered no one. The marble countertops were a battleground. Brad's side a military procession of products arranged by height and function. My side a chaotic rebellion of hastily opened makeup and brushes. The contrast wasn't lost on me. After 7 years of marriage, the metaphors were getting less subtle by the day. "She's just your mother-in-law, not the Queen of England," I whispered to my reflection, leaning closer to the mirror to apply another coat of mascara. But the woman staring back at me looked unconvinced, her hazel eyes wide with the particular strain of anxiety that only Karen Hart could inspire. The last dinner with her had been a masterclass in passive aggression. "Oh, Maggie, your pasta sauce is so creative. I've never thought of adding quite so much garlic. Brad's stomach is rather sensitive, you know." As if I hadn't been cooking for her son for nearly a decade. As if Brad hadn't specifically requested extra garlic that night, then thrown me under the bus with a sympathetic shrug to his mother. I closed my eyes, mascara wand suspended midair. Just smile and nod. Keep the peace. 3 hours max, then it's over. The mantra felt hollow, but it was all I had. My phone buzzed on the counter and I lunged for it like a lifeline. "Lena, survive dinner. Drinks after? I have stories about Jason's latest get-rich-quick disaster." A genuine smile cracked through my carefully constructed facade. Lena was chaos incarnate, but she was the only person in my life who still saw me. Not just Brad Hart's accommodating wife, but Maggie, the woman who once had opinions and ambitions and a laugh that didn't sound like it had been manufactured in a laboratory. I texted back, "God, yes. If I make it through without accidentally spilling wine on Karen's new Burberry, I deserve tequila." The dress still didn't feel right. I opened our walk-in closet where my clothes occupied a carefully delineated third of the space. My hand hovered over a crimson wrap dress before I remembered Brad's comment from 3 months ago. Red makes you look like you're trying too hard. I moved to a black sheath dress instead, then recalled his dismissive, "Funeral chic isn't appropriate for dinner, Maggie." I settled back on navy blue. Safe. Appropriate. Forgettable. Back at the mirror, I practiced my laugh. The one Brad approved of. Light, melodic, contained. Not my real laugh, which once burst out unfiltered, head thrown back, occasionally with a snort if something was truly hilarious. That laugh had been gradually excised from my repertoire, deemed attention-seeking and grating by year 3 of our marriage. "Ha ha ha," I practiced softly, watching my face for any signs of genuine emotion breaking through the pleasant mask. "Oh, Karen, you're so funny. Ha ha ha." God, I was pathetic. I hadn't always been this way. Once, I'd been a rising star at my advertising agency, known for sharp copy and sharper comebacks. I'd had fire, ambition, an identity beyond being someone's wife. I tried to remember that woman as I applied my lipstick. Neutral pink, not the berry shade I preferred, but that Brad found unprofessional. Where had that Maggie gone? She disappeared so gradually I hardly noticed, eroded by 1,000 tiny corrections, suggestions, and disappointed sighs. My phone buzzed again. Lena. Wear the push-up bra. Small acts of rebellion keep us sane, girl. I laughed. My real laugh, just for a moment, then clapped a hand over my mouth, glancing nervously at the door. The bathroom door swung open without a knock because privacy had also become a theoretical concept in my marriage. Brad stood there, already dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled Success Under 40. We need to leave in 10 minutes. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering just long enough on the navy dress to make my stomach clench. Is that what you're wearing? 5 words. Just 5 simple words that somehow contained an entire encyclopedia of judgment. I thought you liked this one, I said, hating the slight upward inflection that made it sound like a question rather than a statement. It's fine. Brad checked his watch, the Rolex I'd saved for 6 months to give him on our anniversary. Mother's already texted twice. You know how she gets when we're late. I knew exactly how Karen got. She would smile tightly and say, "No worries at all." Then spend the entire dinner making pointed comments about responsibility and consideration. I'm ready, I said, grabbing my clutch and checking its contents. Just need lipstick. Brad sighed, the sound finely calibrated to express disappointment without being overtly critical. The nude shade, please. The pink makes your teeth look yellow. My teeth were perfectly white, professionally whitened at the same dentist Brad used. But I nodded and reached for the nude lipstick. 10 minutes, he repeated, already turning away. And maybe run a brush through your hair again? The humidity is making it frizz. The door closed behind him, and I stared at my reflection. A woman I barely recognized stared back, her eyes holding a flash of something dangerous, anger or despair, possibly both. I quickly brushed it away, along with the imaginary frizz in my perfectly styled chestnut hair. Just 3 hours of dinner. I could do this. I'd been doing it for years. I texted Lena one last time. Leaving now. Have tequila ready. I might need the whole bottle. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Karen would choose. Le Château had all the pretension its name promised, with prices to match. Crisp, white tablecloths draped over tables, set far enough apart to ensure private conversations stayed private. The lighting was artfully dim, flattering to those who'd had work done, and forgiving to those who hadn't yet succumbed to Karen's favourite plastic surgeon. Brad's hand pressed against the small of my back as we approached the maître d', a gesture that might look affectionate to observers, but felt more like a shepherd guiding a wayward sheep. "Mr. Hart," the host said with practiced deference, "your mother has already arrived, right this way." Of course she had. Karen Hart was pathologically early to everything, a trait she'd passed to her son, and a standard to which I perpetually failed to measure up. I spotted her immediately, perched at a corner table like a queen holding court. Her silver blonde hair was styled in an immaculate bob that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She wore a pale blue dress that somehow made her look both elegant and formidable, accessorized with pearls that had likely witnessed the signing of the Declaration of Independence. She didn't stand when she saw us. She never did. "There you are," Karen said, checking her watch, though she knew exactly how many minutes had passed since she'd arrived. I was beginning to worry. "Traffic," Brad lied smoothly, pulling out my chair. "You look wonderful, Mother." I leaned in for the obligatory air kiss, catching a whiff of Chanel No. 5 and disapproval. "It's lovely to see you, Karen." Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, a customs inspection at the border of her acceptance. "Maggie, dear, Navy is certainly safe, isn't it?" And you've done something new with your hair. I hadn't. Thank you, I replied, my cheeks already aching from the smile I'd plastered on. In my head, I added, and you're still wearing the expression of someone who's detected a bad smell, but is too polite to mention it. I took the liberty of ordering champagne, Karen announced as a waiter materialised beside us. To celebrate. Brad raised an eyebrow. What are we celebrating? Karen's smile was a perfect crescent moon, cold and distant. I'll tell you after we toast. The champagne arrived in elegant flutes. I wasn't particularly fond of champagne, it gave me a headache, but I'd learned years ago that expressing preferences was just an invitation for them to be systematically dismantled. To my brilliant son, Karen declared, raising her glass, always rising to new heights. We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip, wondering what fresh hell this particular celebration would bring. I heard through Josephine Porter that you're being considered for junior partner, Karen continued, her eyes gleaming with vicarious ambition. Of course, I didn't need her to tell me. I always knew you'd be the youngest partner in the firm's history. Brad smiled modestly, though I could see the pleasure radiating off him like heat. Nothing's official yet, Mother. It will be, she said with absolute certainty, which is why I brought this. From beside her chair, Karen produced a small box wrapped in silver paper. She slid it across the table to Brad, who accepted it with the casual entitlement of someone who expected no less. You shouldn't have, he said, already untying the ribbon. Inside was a watch that made his Rolex look like a carnival prize. I recognised the brand only because I'd once made the mistake of looking up its price while browsing for Brad's birthday gift. The number had so many zeros, I'd closed the browser tab in mild panic. It was your father's, Karen said. I had it restored. A future partner should have a timepiece with history. Brad's expression softened in a way it rarely did around me. It's perfect. Thank you, Mother. Karen turned to me, reaching into her purse. And for you, Maggie. A little something. She handed me a small flat package. I unwrapped it carefully, already preparing my grateful face regardless of the contents. Inside was a day planner with Mrs. Bradford Hart embossed in gold on the cover. I noticed you seem a bit scattered lately, Karen explained. This has sections for meal planning, social engagements, and household inventory. I use one myself. It changed my life. Translation. You're disorganized and failing as a wife. Here's a remedial tool. It's beautiful, I lied. Thank you. In my head, I imagined myself saying, fascinating gift, Karen. Did they not have subjugated wives for dummies in stock? But out loud, I just repeated, it's so thoughtful. The waiter returned, and Brad took charge, as he always did. We'll start with the seafood platter and foie gras. I glanced at the menu. The Pinot Noir might pair nicely. We'll have the Bordeaux, Brad interrupted, not even looking my way. The 2010. The waiter nodded, scribbling on his pad. Excellent choice, sir. I took another sip of champagne, wishing it were something stronger. A shot of tequila. A gallon of bleach. Either would do. So, Maggie, Karen turned her attention to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. How's that little writing hobby of yours? Still playing with your poems or whatever it was? It wasn't poems. It was award-winning copy for major advertising campaigns, plus a half-completed novel that had once earned interest from an actual literary agent. But that was before Brad had suggested my writing time might be better spent supporting his career trajectory. I haven't had much time for writing lately, I said carefully. Oh, that's probably for the best, Karen nodded. Creative pursuits are fine for college students, but real life requires focus. Don't you think, Brad? Brad was studying the wine list, only half listening. Oh, yes. Maggie's much better suited to running our household. Her organisational skills are more domestic than professional. I gripped my champagne flute harder, imagining instead it was Brad's perfectly knotted tie, twisted around his neck just tight enough to make his eyes bulge. The Porters are having a dinner party next month, Karen declared, shifting topics with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Bradford, you simply must attend. Richard's firm is looking for fresh talent, and with partnership on the horizon. And just like that, I vanished from the conversation. They discussed Brad's career prospects, the political connections he needed to cultivate, the clubs he should join. I sat there, present but irrelevant, like a lamp or a particularly uninspired floral arrangement. In the reflection of my water glass, I caught a glimpse of my face, composed, pleasant, hollow. I wondered how long a person could vanish before they forgot the way back to themselves. The seafood platter arrived, a glistening monument to oceanic excess, and I seized the opportunity to inject myself back into the conversation. If I had to endure this dinner, I'd at least attempt to exist within it. This reminds me of that amazing seafood place in Cape Cod, I said, selecting a shrimp. Remember when Alicia and I found that little restaurant off the boardwalk during senior year? Karen looked blankly at me, but I pressed on. Alicia had been my college roommate, my maid of honour, and, before Brad had deemed her too aggressive, my closest friend. We were supposed to meet these guys from Boston University, but they stood us up. So instead of moping, we blew our semester's coffee budget on this ridiculous seafood tower and a bottle of terrible wine. I smiled at the memory. Alicia made this toast about how... It wasn't senior year, Brad interrupted, his tone that particular blend of helpful and condescending he'd perfected. It was junior year, during that spring break, when you went instead of interviewing for that internship. And it wasn't in Cape Cod, it was Nantucket. I blinked. No, I'm pretty sure... Maggie, Brad said with a patient sigh. I've heard this story at least 5 times. It was definitely Nantucket. You stayed at that bed and breakfast with the blue shutters. That was a different trip entirely, one I'd taken with my parents years earlier. But I recognised the expression on Brad's face, the one that said further correction would be interpreted as public defiance. Right, I conceded. Nantucket! Karen beamed at her son. Bradford has always had such an excellent memory for details. Even as a little boy, he could recite entire baseball statistics after just glancing at them. I pushed on with my story, determined to finish at least one anecdote. Anyway, Alicia made this toast about how men would come and go, but... I believe her name was actually Alyssa. Brad cut in again, selecting an oyster. The tall one, with the unfortunate laugh, right? My friend of 4 years had definitely been Alicia, not Alyssa. She'd been 5'2" and had a laugh like sunshine breaking through clouds. Her name was Alicia, I said quietly. Brad's eyebrows rose fractionally. Are you sure? I distinctly remember you introducing her as Alyssa at our engagement party. I hadn't. She hadn't even attended our engagement party. By then, Brad had already begun the subtle campaign to distance me from friends he found problematic. Karen jumped in. Bradford's right. I remember her too. Very loud girl, inappropriate dress for a formal occasion. That described neither Alicia nor our engagement party. But I was suddenly so tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired. Maybe I'm confused, I said, though I wasn't. It happens to the best of us, dear, Karen said with synthetic sympathy. Brad mentioned you've been rather forgetful lately. I reached for my wine glass. noticing with distant alarm that my hand was trembling slightly. The Bordeaux, which I hadn't selected, sloshed dangerously close to the rim. When had this become my life? When had I started doubting my own memories rather than challenging his? I could still picture myself 5 years ago, standing in a boardroom, confidently presenting an ad campaign to executives 3 times my age, my voice never wavering, my convictions solid as bedrock. Now I couldn't even correctly identify my own college roommate without having the facts rewritten. Anyway, Brad continued, seamlessly stealing the narrative. What Maggie is trying to say is that she and her friend had this little adventure where they ordered far outside their budget. Typical college impulsiveness. Karen chuckled, delighted by her son's interpretation. Girls will be girls. I'm so glad Bradford helped you mature past that stage, Maggie. I took a larger swallow of wine than was strictly appropriate. In my head, I was composing a scathing response. Yes, Karen, thank God your son rescued me from my wild ways of checks notes, eating seafood and having female friends. Instead, I nodded and offered a tight-lipped smile. Brad launched into a story about his latest courtroom victory, something involving corporate tax law that I'd heard 3 times already. He delivered the punchline, a particularly cutting remark he'd made to opposing counsel, and I laughed. Too loud, too real. A flash of my old laugh escaped before I could contain it. Brad's hand immediately found my forearm, his fingers pressing just firmly enough to signal disapproval, while appearing affectionate to outside observers. Indoor voice, sweetheart, he murmured, his smile never faltering. Remember what we discussed about appropriate dinner reactions? Heat rushed to my face. We were in public, and he was scolding me like a child who'd belched at the table. Sorry, I whispered, mortified. Karen watched the exchange with hawkish interest. Brad tells me you've been having trouble keeping up with the house lately, she said, changing subjects with surgical precision. The housekeeper situation still unresolved. Brad answered before I could. Maggie insisted she could handle the house herself after Mrs. Winters retired, but it's been a bit of a learning curve. My spine stiffened. I'd never insisted on anything. Brad had decided our housekeeper of 5 years was getting too familiar after she'd mentioned to me that I seemed down lately and suggested I see friends more often. I'm managing fine, I said. The dinner party last week suggested otherwise, Brad continued as if I hadn't spoken. The linens weren't pressed properly and the dessert was store-bought. I'd spent 3 days preparing that dinner party, including making a tiramisu from scratch. The dessert he was referring to was a box of specialty chocolates I'd put out as an additional offering. Maggie used to be quite the hostess when you first married, Karen said to Brad. Perhaps she's just going through a phase. Women sometimes get these moods. They continued discussing me as if I were a household appliance that had started malfunctioning. The dishwasher that suddenly leaves spots on the glasses, the air conditioner making that strange rattling noise, the wife who can't seem to remember she's not supposed to laugh too loudly. I think she's just tired, Brad offered generously. Aren't you, sweetheart? Yes, I answered mechanically. Tired? It wasn't a lie. I was exhausted down to my soul. The waiter came to clear our plates, and I realised I'd barely touched my food. Not that anyone noticed. They were too busy dissecting my shortcomings. Perhaps we should get Maggie a day planner, Brad mused, eyeing the gift his mother had brought me. Oh, wait, Mother already thought of that. They laughed together, a perfect harmony of condescension. I sat perfectly still, my face a pleasant mask, wondering how much more of myself I could lose before there was nothing left at all. The dessert menu arrived like a lifeboat in my sea of humiliation. I clung to it, studying the offerings with an intensity usually reserved for legal contracts or bomb defusal instructions. "I think I'll have the chocolate soufflé," I said, perhaps too eagerly. Karen's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Are you sure that's wise, dear?" "Those are terribly fattening." I lowered the menu slightly, meeting her gaze. "It's just been a while since I've had one." "Maggie's always had a weakness for sweets," Brad said to his mother, though his eyes remained fixed on me. "I keep telling her that metabolism changes after 30. "Especially for women," Karen agreed, nodding sagely as if imparting cosmic wisdom rather than basic biology filtered through casual misogyny. "I noticed your dress was a bit snug in the hips, dear." My dress fit perfectly. We all knew it did. "The chocolate soufflé," I repeated to the waiter, who had been hovering awkwardly during this exchange. "Please." Brad sighed dramatically. "Make that one soufflé and 2 spoons. We'll share." He turned to his mother. "And the crème brûlée for you, Mother?" "You always say Le Château's is the best in the city." Karen beamed. "You remember everything, don't you?" The waiter retreated, and I took another sip of wine, imagining it was some magic potion that would either render me invisible or then mute. Neither happened. "Speaking of changes," Brad continued, his tone deceptively casual, "I was thinking we might look into that trainer Mother uses." "What's his name again?" "Alessandro," Karen supplied helpfully. "Italian, former Olympian, works wonders with problem areas." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to my midsection. I hadn't gained weight. If anything, stress had whittled me down over the past year. But in the Hart family universe, a woman could always stand to lose 5 more pounds. "I exercise regularly," I said quietly. 4 times a week at the gym, plus yoga, which Brad had initially encouraged because it improves flexibility. A comment delivered with a suggestive wink that had made my skin crawl. "Yes, but with proper guidance, you could be so much more effective," Brad replied. "Alessandro specializes in women who've let themselves go a bit." Something inside me, something small but fierce, a pilot light of dignity I thought had been extinguished years ago, flickered to life. When my soufflé arrived, golden and perfect, I didn't wait for Brad to take his ceremonial first bite. I plunged my spoon directly into the center, watching with satisfaction as it deflated with a sigh that matched the ones Brad had been directing at me all evening. I said, closing my eyes as the rich chocolate melted on my tongue. "Delicious." I took another bite, and another. Not dainty, ladylike nibbles, but proper, indulgent spoonfuls. Brad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps we should share as planned." "You can order your own," I suggested, surprising myself with this tiny rebellion. "The kitchen probably has more." Karen's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. For a glorious, fleeting moment, I imagined going further. Picking up my wineglass and emptying its contents directly into Brad's lap. Watching the red liquid seep through his perfect charcoal suit, seeing the shock on his face as his careful control slipped away. But reality reasserted itself as quickly as the fantasy had formed. I couldn't do that. The repercussions would be... I shuddered internally, remembering the last time I'd embarrassed Brad in public. The silent treatment for days, followed by a meticulous inventory of my failings, delivered in that calm, reasonable voice that was somehow worse than shouting. "I'm sorry," I said, pushing the half-eaten soufflé toward him. "You're right. We should share." Just like that, the mask slipped back into place. Perfect Maggie. Agreeable Maggie. Maggie who never makes waves. Brad's expression softened into smug satisfaction, as he took the spoon, scraping it against the porcelain with a sound that set my teeth on edge. "No harm done," he said magnanimously, "though perhaps we should discuss portion control again when we get home." Karen patted my hand with cold fingers. "It's not easy maintaining standards, dear. But that's why Bradford chose you. He saw your potential." Translation: You were a fixer-upper project, and my son generously took you on. I nodded automatically, retreating to that quiet place in my mind where their words couldn't reach me. It was getting harder to find that place lately. The rest of dessert passed in a blur. I smiled when appropriate, nodded at the right intervals, and counted the minutes until escape. Brad and Karen discussed summer vacation plans, the Hamptons naturally, while I sat, present but not present, like a ghost haunting its own life. The drive home was a continuation of the dinner, only without Karen's additional commentary. Brad dissected my behaviour with surgical precision. "You were unusually quiet tonight," he observed, as if my silence hadn't been enforced by his constant interruptions. Was I? And that moment with the dessert was disappointing. Mother noticed, of course. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "It's just that we've talked about this, Maggie. Public appearances matter in my position. Junior partners' wives are expected to show a certain restraint." I stared out the window at passing streetlights, each one a brief flash of illumination in the darkness. "You're right." And that laugh during my story about Judge Watkins. You know how I feel about that particular laugh. "I know. I'm sorry." "And your posture was slipping by the end of the meal. Remember what we discussed about shoulder alignment?" "Yes." He continued the inventory of my failures while I nodded at appropriate intervals, disconnecting from my body until we pulled into our driveway. Our house loomed before us, a modern architectural statement with clean lines and massive windows. Brad's choice, of course. I'd wanted something with character, perhaps a Victorian with a reading nook. But sleek minimalism was more aligned with our brand, whatever that meant. In our bedroom, I went through my nightly routine mechanically, removing makeup, hanging up the navy dress that had failed to render me invisible, applying the expensive night cream that Brad had selected because preventative aging measures are an investment. When Brad finally fell asleep, his breathing deep and even, I slipped out of bed and padded to the guest bathroom, the one space he rarely entered. Kneeling before the cabinet beneath the sink, I pushed aside extra towels and spare toilet paper, reaching toward the very back. My fingers closed around ceramic handles. One by one, I pulled them out, my secret collection of novelty mugs, hidden like contraband. Queen of fucking everything. Resting coffee face. Not today, Satan. And my favourite. Purchased during a rare solo shopping trip, Drama Queen. Emblazoned in glittering pink letters. Small acts of rebellion. Tiny fragments of a self I was losing touch with more each day. My phone buzzed from where I'd left it on the counter. A text from Lena. "Still alive? I'm at the salon with a bottle of Patron that has your name on it." I stared at the screen, then at the mugs arranged before me like artifacts from another woman's life. A woman with opinions and laughter and fire. I typed back, "Give me 20 minutes." Carefully, I re-hid my forbidden mugs and crept back to the bedroom doorway. Brad's breathing was deep and even. He'd taken his Ambien, which meant he'd be out for at least 6 hours. Perfect. I slipped on yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt. Clothes Brad would never approve of, but that felt like armour against his judgment. My car keys were in my purse, but taking the car would mean the garage door opener's mechanical groan. Instead, I grabbed the spare house key from the kitchen drawer and eased out the back door. The night air hit my face, cool and liberating. For the first time all evening, I could breathe properly. No one was watching my posture, critiquing my laugh, or measuring my portions. Lena's salon was only 6 blocks away. An easy walk through our perfectly manicured neighbourhood, where every house looked like a variation of the same modern prison. As I walked, my phone buzzed again. "Hurry up! I'm 3 shots in and about to drunk text Jason just to tell him he's worthless." I smiled. My real smile, not the practiced one, and picked up my pace. In 15 minutes, I'd be sitting in a styling chair, drinking tequila straight from the bottle if I wanted, laughing as loud as my lungs would allow. It wasn't an escape plan, not really, just a few stolen hours of being myself. But as I turned the corner and saw the warm lights of Cruise Control Salon glowing in the darkness, that word echoed in my mind again. Escape.